Hey everybody, welcome back to my channel. I'm doing a little bit of location scouting here today with my Lumix G9 here. Yeah, I'm not out, it's like midday shooting, so I'm not out taking trying to get my best images, but I am just doing a bit of location scouting, checking out a spot that I've never photographed before. And yeah, I mean, I thought that'd be a fun setting for me to talk about the camera settings I use for this camera, my Lumix G9, for landscape photography, and maybe I'll share a few photos with you guys as well if I get any that I think are worth sharing. But yeah, it's a beautiful location, and there's some beautiful mountains there behind me. I believe that is called Fool's Peak. It's the name of that mountain behind me. You might be able to kind of see there. But yeah, let's jump right into this video about my settings that I use for this camera, the Lumix G9, for landscape photography. So yeah, this is my Lumix G9. I've had this camera for about a year now, and I just actually made a little review talking about this camera on my channel, but I really wanted to make a video sharing kind of what settings I'm using on this camera for landscape photography, which landscape photography is mostly what I shoot, so that's what, you know, this camera is set up for. I kind of figured if someone else has this camera or is interested in buying one of these cameras, maybe you'd be curious to know what settings people use on it. Obviously, everyone's going to set their camera up a bit differently based on your preferences, so this is just me sharing my preferences for this particular camera. Well, first things first, I pretty much always shoot in full manual mode. I know a lot of people like shooting at aperture priority, but personally I like to have full control over all of my settings at all times. And the thing with me, if you're using aperture priority, you don't have control over the shutter speed, and actually controlling shutter speed is something that's pretty important to me. I like to try and slow down water and stuff if I'm shooting like creeks or waterfalls or rapids or lakes and stuff. I like to have control over the shutter speed, so really shooting in full manual is, to me, the only option. I guess if you don't really care about shutter speed, then you could shoot at aperture priority in those instances, but I really do enjoy having full control over my camera settings at all times. So yeah, pretty simple, but yeah, that's the explanation of why I use full manual at all times and don't ever actually shoot anything else. I never use aperture priority, just full manual. Let's talk about ISO here for a second. The base ISO for this camera is 200, which is what I always shoot at. I know sometimes people may like to shoot auto ISO, but I do not. I like to try to keep mine as low as possible because, I mean, you do want to avoid noise. Now, this thing can definitely shoot up to like 800 or 1000 without probably creating any noise. And if I'm shooting in darker conditions, and sometimes I will turn the ISO up, but generally I keep it a base ISO of 200 in almost all conditions. The only time I'll actually put it down, this camera does go down to 100. If I'm shooting long exposures and want to get a longer exposure, just get it a little bit darker exposure, then I will turn it down to 100 just to get it less. But generally, if shooting day to day, if I'm just doing regular shooting, not like really longer exposures or in really dark conditions, then I'm just going to keep it at 200 as much as I possibly can. I probably shoot at ISO 200 on this at least 95% of the time, or possibly more, to be honest with you. As far as white balance, I actually always shoot the G9 on auto white balance, so it's the only thing I don't have on. I just keep it on auto because I find that auto does just fine. Now that's just for photography. Now the G85 I'm filming this video with, I actually shoot normally in daylight mode, the white balance, because if you're shooting video, the white balance actually kind of changes. So you'll actually notice the difference shooting clips if you have an auto white balance. It's going to change. Auto white balance is actually going to change how the picture looks. So yeah, I mean, I shoot auto on this because I'm shooting stills and it doesn't really matter, and I'm shooting all my files in RAW, so, you know, editing your photos in RAW, you can pretty much do whatever you want with the color and stuff, so I'm not really too worried about that. So yeah, auto white balance works just fine for shooting this. For stills, that works perfectly fine for me. I don't really feel the need to change it. Now, the other two things I'm going to talk about on here are two features that I use quite often, and that's why it's a setting I'm going to talk about, because I use them a lot. But the front here, there's a little switch on the front of this camera here. You can switch on and off, and I use that for bracketing, exposure bracketing particularly. You can use focus bracketing on this as well, but I use it for exposure bracketing, and that's actually a feature I use a lot, so that's why I'm going to talk about that on this. But you just switch this switch here on or off on the front, and that turns exposure bracketing on or off. And how I have it set up is that it will take 3 separate exposures in like a burst, And yeah, that way when I'm going to editing, I can kind of get an option of which one I want to use. Now I generally only use that in like really high contrast scenes because I want to have options when I go to edit the image. If I'm shooting a scene that's not very high contrast, a lot of dynamic range, then I'm not going to probably use bracketing. So a lot of times I don't use it, but it's a really great feature to have, and I find myself that when I do shoot in the certain conditions like that, I really like having the option to choose from 3 different photos just to make sure I have 3 different exposures to choose from. So that's actually a really important feature and setting on this camera for me. Personally, I use it quite frequently, and it's great. Now, I'm sure if you had a different kind of camera, a different Lumix camera, a different brand of camera, then you could probably set your exposure bracketing to a different button on here, but I just have it set to the little switch up there. I find it really convenient and easy to get to, switch on and off, and yeah, I really enjoy that feature on this camera, and it's a really important setting for me personally. The last thing I'm going to talk about that's really important setting I have set up on this camera for landscape photography is back button focusing. I pretty much when I switched over to this camera, I switched over using back button focusing, and I'll probably never go back. Actually, when I shot my G85, only before I had the G9, I actually still used manual focus, which works pretty good, but if you really want good pinpoint focus, it's great to have back button focus. And I love just using this little joystick on the back here to kind of move the little pinpoint where I want the focus point to be, and then you just hold down this button right here, and that'll focus right on where you have that pinpoint on. So that's fantastic. And that way, you know, I don't have to press the shutter down to focus, which is great because sometimes you just take photos by accident when you're doing that, which I don't really like. So I like getting my focus first, and then when you take the photo, you just press the shutter, and you take the image, and it's, you got focus, you just hold that button there. So I love back button focus on this camera. It's fantastic. And it just seems like you're always going to get your focus on point when you're using that because it's just a little pinpoint, and you choose exactly where you're on the focus point at. So I found that to just be a fantastic thing to have on this camera, and that joystick there makes it really easy to use back button focus and choose your focus point. So yeah, absolutely love that on there. And those are kind of like the essential settings I feel like I have on my Lumix G9. It's pretty basic actually. There's not really anything super complicated. I don't dive super deep into settings. There's probably more that I could do if I really wanted to, but honestly I kind of want my camera as like simple as possible, so I can just go out and I can just take it out and it's ready to shoot, and I know how it works, and I don't have to worry about setting anything up, all these different things for different shooting conditions. I kind of just like pull the camera out and it's ready to shoot. So that's an awesome way for me personally to have my camera set up when out here in the wilderness shooting landscape photography. Anyway, I hope you guys maybe found this video useful, talking about my camera settings for my Lumix G9 for landscape photography. Really the only reason I decided to make this video is because I kind of talk about using this camera all the time in my vlogs, and I even made like a review about this camera, so I thought maybe I should just finish off the whole thing and just share kind of what settings I'm using for it if anyone was interested in how I had this camera set up. Again, it's pretty simple. I don't want to have a complicated setup I'm going to shoot. I just want to be able to pull the camera out and it's ready to shoot. I don't want to like think about too much or worry about where my settings are. I just know what it is, and I've become very comfortable with this camera. After using it for about the past year, it's fantastic. I couldn't recommend this camera enough for landscape photography and probably other types of photography as well. But yeah, thank you for watching. If you guys did enjoy the video and want to see more videos about landscape photography and the Lumix G9, then yeah, subscribe to my channel down below. I'd greatly appreciate it. And leave a comment, let me know what you think. And maybe if you have a G9, let me know how you kind of have your camera set up and how you do it differently than I have, or the same, or what you like about it, or what you don't like about it. Yeah, let me know. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.